Welcome to number 24 in our series of Rumble on the River. 24! Okay, so I'm Jan Zuckerman. I know many of you, and I'm honored to be your moderator tonight. Thank you for being here. For generations, the lower Willamette was a rich, wild system of lakes, marshes, shallow wetlands, streams, forests, and wildlife where many bands of tribes lived, fished, traded, hunted, and called home. These include the Multnomah, Wasco, Cowlitz, Cathlamet, Clackamas, bands of Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Molalla, Yakima, and many other tribes who made their home along the Willamette and Columbia Rivers, living in right relationship with land and the water. We honor their legacy, their lives, and their descendants who carry on tribal traditions for present and future generations. We honor their care for this beautiful land, their resilience, and their sovereign rights. We pay respect to elders, past and present, who have stewarded these lands and waters throughout generations. We also acknowledge that a legacy of displacement, violence, and oppression has brought many of us to this land, and the system continues to perpetuate environmental racism, discrimination, and oppression. With this acknowledgement, we uphold our commitment to support these original peoples and work to repair the damage as we do our work. If you haven't had the opportunity, I've said this, I think, at many of the rumbles, please support the Chinook Nation's push to regain federal recognition that was granted in 2001 and taken away 18 months later. Go to chinookjustice.org to sign a petition and to donate. Before we hear from our wonderful panel, I want to thank Green Acres for hosting us in this extraordinary place next to the river. Sarah Taylor is going to share a little bit about the history of Green Acres.
Just want to say that the people who do this, they went and got their grandchild and said, Sarah, you do it. So I do want to give credit to the amazing imagination, particularly of Tim Wetzel, who pulls logs out of the river and turns them into places. So they're not here right now, but I do want to say that amazing work that they have done in reimagining the river. I'm from the Portland Harbor Community Advisory Group, which is super fun related, and the Braided River, which is trying to reimagine this river, and that's our office right there. We share that also with Willamette River Keepers, Rewild, and other nonprofits. So I just wanted to speak a little bit for Green Acres. They are creating a nonprofit, and they're also creating a vision for our waterfront. Not only do they have 49 businesses here, many of them manufacturing, we have artists, we have nonprofits, we have a pollinator garden, and we have a beach that they are trying to restore. It is an amazing vision for what can happen along the river. So I hope that you get to walk around. If you go that way, you'll end up on the beach. And then I just wanted to read this from the EPA. Equitable development is an approach for meeting the needs of underserved communities through policies and programs that reduce disparities while fostering places that are healthy and vibrant. It is increasingly considered an effective place-based action for creating strong and livable communities. So that's what we're trying to do here, and thank you to the vision of the Green Acre people who have worked so hard this was a brownfield. Just to let you know, this was a polluted brownfield when they came here, and this is what they have done in not that many years. So just think what we could do if we had this vision for other parts of the river. So, and there is a lot next door owned by the Port of Portland, which everybody is advocating for giving back to the tribe. So lots of great things are going to happen in the future, and we hope this vision will spread, and I know these speakers will help with that.
Thanks, Sarah. If you are able, we do welcome contributions to help keep future rumbles free and accessible. There's a little donation container right over on the table there. And in case I forget, at the end of the evening, we are going to need a lot of help folding tables and chairs, and we'll give you more specific instructions about that in just a little bit. So glad it's windy. Breeze. And I do want to thank 350 PDX also, because they gave us a lot of chairs for this event. We couldn't have done it otherwise. I'd like to thank Mac McKinley, I'm not sure if Mac's here, for designing our Rumble flyers, month after month after month, and the programs, and to Barbara Bernstein, who is right here, being our videographer this evening, and to Margaret Butler, who's going to be our timekeeper, and to our Rumble team that likes to move things around, to make mountains shake. So I want to thank them all. Please make yourself comfortable, move around as you need to. The bathrooms are that way. If you go straight that way, eventually on the left you'll see a sign that says restrooms, and they're back kind of behind several things back there. You'll find it. Just don't wait till it's an emergency. And please make sure, if you haven't already, to visit the organizational tables and check the back of your program for updated contact information for your elected officials. Staying in touch is one of the simplest and most powerful things you can do. They need to hear from us. And tonight, after the Rumble, we have a special treat, a sing-along at the end with Deneen Crow and Michaela McCormick. So we're really happy to have them here to sing with us. And a big, big shout out to our many co-sponsors. Your partnership and outreach make gatherings like this possible. The names are listed in your Rumble program, and there's a lot of them. How many of you this is your first Rumble on the river? Wow, this is awesome. Great, thank you. And a warm welcome to all of the returning Rumblers. Appreciate you. Sitting together here near the Willamette River, I am struck by the juxtaposition of decay and beauty, loss and abundance, limitations and opportunities. The river is a confluence of social, ecological, economic, and historical significance, and yet we continue to struggle to protect this very place that sustains us. As Bob Salinger put it, as much as we have hardened the river, hardened its banks, hardened its floodplains, we have hardened the processes that allow us to make change. Do we have the political will to crack the iron wall that has ruled the lower Willamette, created a Superfund site, the critical energy infrastructure hub, and threatened 16 fish and the orca whale? Or are our hearts too hardened to learn from our history of abuse and continued displacement of non-human and human species to pick a different path forward? Can we soften the processes that have been getting in the way of a healthy, safe, accessible landscape with shallow water habitat and riparian vegetation, the kind of landscape needed if we are going to save our salmon and ourselves? I think Bob believed that our collective power can repair the land, and relationships with those who came before us, are here now, and protect those who will come after us. But it will take determination and a lot of hard work. And with that, I would like to introduce our panel who have been doing a lot of hard work around the river. And I'd like, they're going to be sharing their knowledge and insight about this place and how we can collectively break down the iron wall. I'll introduce everyone and then we'll go from there. First, right to my left, I have I'm very excited to welcome Elaine Harvey, who is the Watershed Department Manager with the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission. Welcome. Mike Houck is the Director of the Urban Greenspaces Institute. Thanks, Mike. Caleb Shaffer, the Portland Harbor Team Lead, District 10 of the United States Environmental Protection Agency. Mary Stites, the Staff Attorney with Northwest Environmental Defense Center. And Mitch Green, Portland City Councilor, District 4. We will have question and answer after the panel. We're going to begin with Elaine.
So I'd just like to say good evening. Elaine Harvey. And I just introduce myself and in my language. You know, my Indian name is Wanaknai. And I come from the Columbia River, upriver, a place called Houck. And I work, for the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, and I've been here in this position for about 2 years. And prior to, I worked for Yakama Nation Fisheries for nearly 20 years at different capacities, protecting. I was a project manager for a watershed, the Houck watershed, but I also worked with the hydro systems, and I was the environmental coordinator before I left. And, throughout all my years of working in rivers with fish, with salmon, I feel, from my heart that this is what I'm meant to do in life. And my Indian name is Wanaknai, and in our language, Wana translates into river, to water. And so, throughout my career, I've been dealing with rivers, with water. And and the water is real essential to our tribal way of life, to many tribes. I'm thinking about this place where we're at, the Willamette River. I asked my uncle years ago, and I asked him about this river and the history, and he told me. I said, "Where does Willamette? The original, this name of this river, because." There's a lot of geographic names that are tied to our language, to our history, to our culture. And he told me, it's Willamette in our Sahaptin language. Us plateau tribes, we speak many different dialects of the Sahaptin. And if you translate it, he said it's talking about the blue water, and that's where Willamette. The name Willamette originates from the Sahaptin term Willamette, and it was talking, and our people viewed this river as blue, and now you kind of look at it and think, what has changed, what has happened over the many years. And so I work at CritFic, I'll just say CritFic for short term. We do a lot of work. We represent the 4 Columbia River Treaty Tribes, the Yakama Nation, the Nez Perce, the Warm Springs, and the Umatilla. And we all have treaty reserve rights in Willamette, as well as Inchiwana, which is the Columbia River. Our people have traveled here for thousands of years, have harvested different aquatic species from this river. And we still do. Even myself as a child, my mom would bring us down, and my dad, and we'd fish at Willamette Falls for the Pacific lamprey. And it's one of our sacred species that, just like the salmon, the lamprey are just as important. And the lamprey have survived for thousands of years, or millions. They lived through the dinosaur age. They lived through the ice age, and you think about the time scale. What did they survive through? Mm. Then you think about the impacts to the Columbia Basin, and how everything has changed, the dams and everything else, and we're almost driving that species to extinction. You know, you think about the numbers, and now we're, you know, kind of just in the 100,000s, but historically, prehistorically, you know, there was so much fish, and now today, you know, we're limited, and we sometimes we don't fish, sometimes we don't harvest the lamprey that are going up because of river in certain areas because we're concerned. You know, we're practicing conservation on our own to ensure, you know, some of these species will continue on. And, you know, one of the last Pacific lamprey rivers, you know, you can see thousands of them at the falls in certain times of the year, you know, and so you can't say that this place is all of, you know, it's not all lost, and for some reason the lamprey is still coming up and they go to those falls. And, you know, for many tribes, the lamprey are important. And we have a long history of tribal use in this area. It isn't just for lamprey and salmon. Our elders from Warm Springs, they talk about the migrations. We do seasonal migrations. We still do today. And so like the Warm Springs elder, this Jim, he said, when they come to Willamette Falls, they didn't just come straight to Willamette. You know, there's different areas from the Warm Springs territories, you know, where the reservations at, where they live. They come and stop in different areas. And he said, you know, they'd come and harvest camas on their way to here. Or, you know, there's even huckleberries up there towards Mount Hood. So there's different areas where the tribe stopped before they came and came and fished. And, you know, our elders still talk to us about these seasonal rounds, and we still make seasonal rounds. And on June 26th, the Yakima Nation is going to sponsor a lamprey festival at the park right there near the falls. And, you know, if you go on the Yakima Nation Fisheries website, there's, you know, information to RBSP, and it's open to the public. And, you know, I'm sure Yakima Nation would love to see you all come join us. You know, it's a good celebration that you can also get a salmon plate. You can also they serve Pacific lamprey if you like to try it. So, you know, it's an opportunity to connect to the tribes, to connect to our youth who will be there dancing, to our elders who will be there sharing some good words and history about this river, about this place, about the cultural significance that this river has. And not just this river. There are many tributaries, you know, and it's not like we just go to one area. We make our seasonal rounds. We do a lot of traveling. And this spring, you know, I've been busy. We're actually trying to follow our ancestors' footsteps. We don't want to let these lands go idle. Me and my mom and my daughter, you know, we've been traveling everywhere. Ellensburg, Wenatchee, down in Southern Oregon, Central Oregon, we're traveling. You know, we're following those footsteps. You know, that's a teaching for us to carry our culture on, our traditions. You know, and you know, and it's all about a part of the seasonal round. It's a part of our culture. We have songs for our different foods that we're gathering. This time is root gathering season, but salmon season as well. And then later, in another month or less, you know, depends on the berries. It's going to be the berry season. And so we're constantly moving, we're constantly traveling and having these ceremonies. We don't just harvest. We don't just go and, oh yeah, we're going to go fish. We're going to go dig roots or pick berries. We actually have a feast to honor the water. And we also have a feast to honor those first foods, such as the salmon and the Indian celery and the bitterroots and the camas. You know, we honor those. We don't just go out and take, you know. It's honor. And that's kind of what our fisheries and our different tribal programs are. You know, we protect, honor, protect, enhance, conserve. You know, that's what we're doing out here. And Yakima Nation, you know, they've always take that role, leading role, and protection of some of these areas, like, you know, the Portland Harbor site. You know, Yakima Nation was involved with that. The Bradford Island, the Hanford. You know, so our tribes, you know, we're really concerned about that water, about all the waters, the rivers, because we're harvesting the fish from there, and we're worried because there's already studies out there. You know, they tell us the salmon, the steelhead, and the lamprey. They do samples of them to see if, you know, what's in there. And so now we got health advisories telling us, oh yeah, pregnant ladies, you know, you shouldn't consume too many of the lamprey or the salmon. You know, and to us that's hurtful because that's our food. And so, you know, we want healthy rivers, we want healthy fish, because it's going to give us healthy communities. You know, and in my email, you know, they said have a statement for call of action. You know, and I believe is supporting the tribes and what we're doing. You know, we're looking for good allies. You know, we're looking for good allies to support us in all the work that we do. And, you know, we're really working to protect, because we're worried about many generations down the road. We're not just thinking, oh yeah, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. You know, we're thinking way down the road. We're thinking 100 years down the road. You know, we're not just thinking about short term, because, you know, we're worried. We want our children and future generations to experience what it is to catch a salmon and a lamprey, and, you know, and also just being on the river. So I just want to be thankful for this opportunity and the invite. I was kind of surprised, but, you know, I'm thankful to be here, and I'm seeing some familiar faces, so Puthlanut.
I was really glad we started out with an homage to Bob Salinger. I worked with Bob for 30 years. We were joined at the hip on a lot of these issues, and he is sorely missed. I was recruited to the panel by Barbara Bernstein. Has anyone actually succeeded in refusing Barbara? Ever? Any hands? No. I didn't think so. We were asked to come with a personal quote. Mine is, "In livable cities is preservation of the wild," which is the Institute's motto. It's a corollary to Henry David Thoreau's aphorism, "In wildness is the preservation of the world." There's no way on earth we will protect wilderness and so-called pristine landscapes unless we create cities that are livable and lovable. Otherwise, people will continue to seek, quote, their piece of nature outside the city, leading to fragmentation and desolation of the rural landscape. But to be livable and lovable, cities must provide access to nature nearby where people live, work, and play. And what I want to talk about today, and excuse me, I'm not eloquent, as some folks are. I will read my comments to keep on time. Basically, we've been chipping against that iron wall for the last, 45, 50 years in my case. I got involved with Oaks Bottom. I was recruited from a mammalogy seminar at Portland State University 55 years ago, 1970. I testified before City Council in 1979 about Ross Island, the herons on Ross Island. How many people remember Charles Jordan? City Commissioner, then Parks Director. Well, enough of you will appreciate this. Charles was about 6'5", 6'6", whatever, had a presence and had an incredibly booming stentorian voice. I'm in mid-testimony, and he stops me. "Mr. Houck, the heron, is that the bird that stands yea high and comes into my backyard and eats my koi?" "Yes, Commissioner, that's the very bird we're asking you to protect." I've been at it for a while. throughout the 60s and 70s, I think even a lot of conservation organizations really kind of vilified cities. Cities were horrible places. We all wanted to be out there in the wilderness somewhere and didn't want to live in cities. Even the Nature Conservancy viewed working to protect urban nature as a waste of resources. I was told that directly. The mere idea of urban nature was considered an oxymoron. That attitude extended to natural resource agencies as well. In 1980, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife came to Portland Audubon Society, where I was on the board at the time, now Bird Alliance of Oregon, and offered us $5,000 from their non-game program. They said, if you will take on the issue of nature in the Portland region, we'll give you this $5,000 and we don't have to deal with it. And, you know, frankly, it really was an attitude that reflected the antithesis to nature in the city, because obviously nature's out there. That's where the elk are. You know, it's kind of the hook and bullet mentality. I'll have to say, we're very thankful we got that money, because it started a pretty interesting process. I was tasked with conducting fish and wildlife habitat inventories throughout the Portland region. The very first planner I went to, I won't name him, lead planner, Clackamas County, I went in and said, I have this grant, I'm here to do your Goal 5 fish and wildlife habitat inventory. He said, Mike, you don't understand the state program. The Goal 5 does not, fish and wildlife habitat does not apply to the city. Well, he was wrong, and we spent the last 40, 45 years proving that he was wrong. I have a second quote that I'd like to share tonight. I started with that, and I was told we're supposed to have a personal one. I consider this one a personal one. Lewis Mumford, in 1938, spoke to Portland City Club, urged us to create a bi-state regional plan with a focus on the natural environment. With respect to rivers, people who pay more attention to abstract figures than to realities are accustomed to look upon a river as a dividing line. But rivers are dividing lines from only one point of view: military attack. From every other standpoint, the river basin as a whole is a unit, and that's how we should be planning. Fortunately, we have taken Mumford's admission to heart by ignoring the imaginary line between Oregon and Washington on the Columbia River, and we've created, over the last 30, 40 years, a regional system of parks, trails, and natural areas. In the process, we have succeeded in changing the anti-urban bias regarding nature in the city. I'll give you one example. How many people have voted for Metro's bond measures over the years? We had 3 bond measures. First of all, I went to Metro in 1988 because we were not getting any protection from local jurisdictions. And I made a pitch to Richard Devlin and some other Metro councilors. You, the regional government, should be looking at natural resources that cross jurisdictional boundaries. To my amazement, in terms of how government sometimes works, the glacial action, 3 months later, they passed a proclamation that said Metro, the regional government, should be dealing with natural resources. 1992, we developed the Greenspaces Master Plan, and I want to emphasize, for the Portland-Vancouver metropolitan region, a 2-state region. Since then, 95, 2006, and more recently, voters have voted to tax themselves to the tune of almost $1 billion. Metro now owns 20,000 acres of natural areas. They owned nothing in 1988. That is phenomenal. The next big push, the next big chip in the wall. In the late 80s, I got a call from Jack Churchill, PSU public administration professor, berating me over the phone for working with park folks and fish and wildlife agencies. He argued they have no power, they have no money. And he was right. I have 3 words from you. This is right out of the Graduate. It wasn't plastics. Clean Water Act. Clean Water Act. It took me a little while to get the message. But after that, we started working with the Bureau of Environmental Services in Portland And what then was Unified Sewerage Agency, now is Clean Water Services, they have money. They have authority through the Clean Water Act to manage stormwater and watershed health. And one of the cool programs that came out of Portland's efforts at green infrastructure, Tom Lipton right here worked for the city of Portland at the time. He's the one that developed the EcoRoof, the green roof program for the city of Portland, and has had a huge impact. Regarding the Willamette's North Reach, attitudes have changed as well, in my opinion, and we're hearing about that tonight. Working with city staff, I participated in the first Willamette Greenway Goal 15 inventory in 1984, during which we identified nodes, what I call nodes of important fish and wildlife habitat through the North Reach. Today, with much more sophisticated resources, Willamette Riverkeeper, I think they're over there, is actually going to update that inventory, but with far better materials to work with, color infrared photography, so on and so forth. We literally just walked the landscape and made notes back in 1984. In the mid-1980s, the attitude toward the North Reach was there was nothing worth protecting. Fish biologists argued salmon simply streaked through the Portland Harbor to the Columbia. Thanks again to Bob Salinger's work and folks who were here, I'm sure, we now know that salmons require resting and feeding habitat every quarter mile on the river. So it's incredibly important, even though they're just, spots along the industrial area. 3 minutes. That's why I'm reading. We were asked to give our priorities. What we're working on at the Greenspaces Institute right now is ensuring that Ross Island Sand and Gravel finishes their obligations to restore Ross Island. We are going to be working hard to bring Ross Island, actually Ross, Hardtack, East, and Toe Island, which the city owns actually, into public ownership. And we need to continue the restoration process. And I'll have to say, algal blooms have been in the news a lot lately. They're important. But whatever happens in Ross Island needs to be done in a manner that protects the integrity of all 4 of those islands. The next initiative is to, back in '88, I worked with East Willamette Soil Water Conservation District, and wrote a management plan for Oaks Bottom. We adopted the management plan in 1988, City Council did, and from then on, Oaks Bottom has been managed as an urban wildlife refuge. The city of Portland refused to recognize it as such for years and years. So what we want to do is look at Ross Island, the Holgate Channel, and Oaks Bottom as an ecological unit, and getting East Willamette Soil Water Conservation District and others to help us write that management plan. I want to talk to the councilor here. The city is doing a lot about climate change mitigation, reducing greenhouse gases. That's obviously critical. What the city is not doing enough on is climate adaptation. Climate change is here. In 2015, windrows of salmon washed up on the shores of local streams in the Willamette River, a boon to turkey vultures that line the Willamette feeding on dead salmon. Johnson Creek experienced its highest flood since 1996. In 2021, the heat dome caused hundreds of human deaths. How am I doing? Un momento. I've got a lot of other things to say to the council, but I'll just give one example of what I mean by climate adaptation. The Bureau of Environmental Services, the Corps of Engineers, Portland Parks, and others, the neighborhoods, did an incredible restoration project at Westmoreland Park, Crystal Springs Creek. They took out one of those cement pools that contained hot water, basically. They left another one for all the races and fly casting and so forth, but they re-meandered and put riparian vegetation along Crystal Springs Creek. The day of the dedication, Nick Fish, bless him, the Corps, Portland Parks, and others were celebrating this fabulous restoration project 150 feet away. Salmon were spawning as they were speaking. That work helped create a cold water refugium for salmon during one of the heat domes. They were up in Crystal Springs Creek because of that restoration work. We need to have more of that adaptation work out there on the landscape. And I'll just quickly say that my time is up. But if anybody would care to ask me questions about the final 2 points I was going to make, I'd be happy to respond.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. I think everyone is here because they have a common interest of the health of this river and improving the health of this river, and that's really encouraging to see. So thank you for spending your valuable time and being here and being part of this event, and thank you for the event organizers as well. If you looked out at this river a little over 100 years ago, you would see it lined with steam liners. It would look very different. It was heavily channelized, a lot of active industry, even more active than you see today. You'd see log rafts floating down the river. There'd be foundries along the river. There'd also be shipyards clanging with the sound of metal and with progress, because really Portland was built along the sides of these rivers. All that industrial activity that occurred helped build Portland. But with every job that was created with that, with every ship that was launched, there was something else that was happening. And that something else was contamination was occurring. Chemicals were being spilled, waste was being dumped. It was a different time where we really saw our rivers as essentially a sewer system where, in many cities around this country, it was seen as an easy way to get rid of things, and it was done in excess. And while this river was essentially treated like a machine, it wasn't treated like a living thing like it is, a living ecosystem, a vibrant ecosystem. And a lot of people profited from that. But at the same time, a lot of people suffered from that. Tribal fisheries were collapsed. Communities that lived alongside the river, many of them minority, low income, working class communities, were completely unaware of the risk associated with contamination in the river. And so while it created, this behemoth that we know that is Portland today, it has created a lot of associated problems with that. And for years and generations past, that was forgotten about. That contamination settled into the sediment below the river, and kind of that chapter of Portland was forgotten until decades later when that contamination was found. And in 2000, the lower Willamette River, and that's the lower 10-mile stretch of the river that we're looking out here today, was designated a Superfund site. And Superfund sites, I work for the Environmental Protection Agency in the Superfund program, and Superfund sites get that designation because they're some of the most contaminated, most complex sites in the country. And they're sites that states often refer to the federal government because of their significance, because of their complexity. And the Portland Harbor Superfund site is no exception. And in 2000, EPA looked at the site and agreed of all the studies that had been done by the state, all the sampling that had been done, and it was listed as a Superfund site. And so the Superfund site is the lower 10-mile stretch of the Willamette River. So that's roughly from the Broadway Bridge to a little past Sauvie Island. It covers 2,200 acres, so a large area. It includes the contamination that occurs within the river, in the riverbanks, and the uplands as well, where a lot of these facilities operated, and the state is taking the lead on cleaning up those sites. And so the Superfund program has 4 main goals, and these goals are what we're doing here in Portland Harbor. One, it's to protect human health and the environment. That's, the basis of our program is to address the risks associated with contaminated sites. Second, it's to essentially hold polluters accountable. We have a strong enforcement program, and parties that are responsible for that contamination, they are the ones that pay for the cleanup at Superfund sites. A lot of folks, think of polluters and think of the bad guys that were dumping things down the drain in the middle of the night, and sure, some of that exists, but a lot of the practices that were occurring here were also common at the site, common at the time, and actually within the bounds of the law. So nothing illegal was necessarily being done a lot of the time. It was just the way things were done. We had a misunderstanding of systems and ecosystems, and as I said, this river was really looked at as a machine. It wasn't looked at as a vibrant, living ecosystem that it was before it became heavily industrialized, heavily channelized. And 200 years ago, if we were sitting right here, we would probably be sitting in a wetlands. This was a highly braided area, very spread out, very diverse. It more so than any other river in the state of Oregon, this river receives more influx of stormwater coming into it per acre, more so than any other river in the state, and that's just because of the heavy wet season we have here. And along with all that water coming into the system, along with it are 40 to 50 inches of sediment and nutrients, and those nutrients are really what sustain this vibrant ecosystem that indigenous people survived on till time immemorial. So this system, looked very different, and it looks very different today than it looked like when it was operating as a heavily industrial area. So when we listed the Superfund site in 2000, we started to look more closely at it and studied it. Sites like this that are so complex, so large, and the contamination is so extensive and thorough, it's important to take a time to understand it, to develop a plan, to address it, and to be thorough. And what was found when we looked at it were there were 64 contaminants. A lot of these contaminants, there's 6 major contaminants. These include polychlorinated biphenyls, things associated with electrical industry, electrical manufacturing. A lot of these businesses along the river actually had electrical transformers. Some of them were even burning electrical oil that contained PCBs. So PCBs, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, a product of combustion and industrial operations. Pesticides, DET, a lot of oil and gas manufacturing and operation, gas manufacturing associated with that. Dioxins and furans, those are chemical compounds associated with just burning. And metals. So a lot of contaminants, 64 in total, six major compounds, and a whole host of responsible parties. At the Portland Harbor Superfund site, there are over 150 responsible parties that are responsible for the cleanup, and it includes a whole host of entities from sometimes small manufacturers to large oil companies to the city of Portland, the state of Oregon. Even the federal government is actually a responsible party here. It's a different arm of the federal government, not the Environmental Protection Agency. But if you think about it, the World War II effort was significant along the Willamette River. We were manufacturing ships, and after the war, we were running ships up on the shore and dismantling them, and associated with that was asbestos and heavy metals and PCBs and a lot of the contaminants that are associated with the Superfund site. The city of Portland, they were simply operating a stormwater conveyance system which drained into the river through various outfalls. And so, that was common practice in every city at the time. and it was what the city of Portland was doing. And so, again, as I go back to, things that were being done common in many cities across the country at the time, that there just wasn't a good understanding. Since then, we understand a lot more. We collect that stormwater, we treat that stormwater, we put in a big pipe a few years ago, and now less sewage is going to the river. So EPA's now looking at the site. We are in the design phase. That's roughly a 5 to 7 year phase. And that's essentially developing the blueprints for the cleanup. And so we have 17 areas along the river. We have 35 of those 150 or so responsible parties that are developing design work. And EPA is overseeing that work along with the state, the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. We work closely with 6 Native American tribes that are heavily involved, and other various federal and state agencies that are reviewing all the products and all these blueprints and all these designs for the actual cleanup. The actual cleanup's happening in 2027 is what we estimate, and it's going to look significant. It's going to be dredging operations in the river. It's going to be going for 13 years once it starts. We can only operate in the river to protect, this is still a critical migratory habitat for salmon. And so there's a narrow window with which that dredging work can occur. And so there's a 4-month window out of the year from July 1st to October 31st that is essentially, we call the fish window, that those types of operations can occur without stirring up too much sediment that is going to impact the migrating species that we're trying to protect. So that's part of the reason why it's taking 13 years. And currently, we are in negotiations for a consent decree, and a consent decree is a judicial instrument that will oversee that cleanup once it starts. And public process is a very important part of the 4 pillars of the Superfund program. And actually, I think I only mentioned 2. The third and fourth one is reuse of Superfund sites, and the fourth one is community engagement. So it's very important that the community stays involved. We have active community meetings. We have a listserv. We want to be informed. We are a public agency. It's important that we continue to hear your input. And, the story of this river is really going to continue on, and it has a bright future. And part of the reason it does have a bright future is because of all the people that are here today, and because of all of you, because this really, it's a resilient system, but when it has champions like folks here tonight, it has a bright future. And once this river gets cleaned up, once we return it as a resource, once it can become a tribal fishery and access to tribes and other indigenous communities can occur, that's when we'll be in a better place, and we're moving towards that, and the EPA is working to achieve those goals alongside with you. Thank you.
Hi y'all, my name is Mary Stites. I'm the staff attorney at the Northwest Environmental Defense Center. We're a small nonprofit based at Lewis and Clark Law School, and we have a very discrete mission of protecting and preserving the natural resources of the Pacific Northwest. Great tee up, because I'm going to talk about stormwater pollution and floodplain management, and hopefully convince you all that they are all very interconnected issues, and if we can tackle one, hopefully both, we can make really great strides towards conserving floodplain function and protecting our waterways, and also ensuring that we're supporting climate resilient communities, in addition to public health, environmental quality, and our city's economic goals. Yeah, acknowledge that. So I bet y'all are all wondering, what is stormwater pollution? Well, I'll tell you. It occurs when rainwater and snowmelt flows over impervious surfaces like roads and parking lots, and it picks up all of the pollutants. Typically that's oil, heavy metals, fertilizers, sediments. And in industrial areas specifically, it also can carry hazardous substances and other chemicals, and it eventually makes its way into waterways. And in a place like the Willamette, sometimes that's directly, if you look across the waterway, you see an industrial site right on the Willamette, it would collect its stormwater and convey it. Other sites, it gets collected into what's called the MS4 system and conveyed and channelized, sometimes treated. But these pollutants can be really, really harmful to water quality and aquatic life. So a big area of NEDC's programming is to enforce what's called the 1200Z permit. It's kind of a Clean Water Act deep cut, but it is the stormwater permit for industrialized sites. And it's not your standard Clean Water Act permit where you think of like you have a facility and they have a pipe and at some point they're treating that before they discharge it into the waterway. Instead, I kind of describe it as more procedural, where it imposes procedural obligations onto these industrial facilities to implement what's called best management practices. So think making sure your roads are adequately swept and there's not a bunch of leaves on your stormwater conveyance channels. And under this permit as well, they have to take 4 quarterly samples and make sure that they are not discharging above what are called the benchmark exceedance standards. So think iron, lead, oil and grease, like those kind of industrial pollutants. And we monitor their monitoring and bring suit against what we would kind of alleged chronic violators of this permit, and hope to bring them into compliance. And another big part of that is we usually, like 99.9% of the time, we settle those cases and we get money in those settlements to go to other nonprofits and organizations that are doing either river restoration work or other water quality cleanups. And NEDC has we've gotten hundreds of thousands of dollars that has been funneled to different nonprofits doing that kind of work. And it's really kind of rewarding. It's not the most like sexy environmental topic, especially for environmental litigators, but I look at these reports and I'm like, wow, that's a lot of lead, that's a lot of iron going into our waterways. And if you do double containment of your chemicals or whatever, implement your best management practices, a lot of that can be minimized. So that's a really important aspect of our programming, and not a ton of organizations are doing it and having it account for as much of their programming as NEDC. And to kind of bring it back home in a place like Oregon, if you're new here, it's really wet here. And so poorly managed facilities, there's just so much exposure to stormwater that eventually winds up in the Willamette and can wind up also in the Columbia and other tributaries. So the next thing that I want to talk to y'all about is floodplain development and floodplain conservation and why that's so important. And for those that don't know, floodplains are low-lying areas that are adjacent to rivers and streams and other waterways, and they serve as natural buffers during flooding events. And so when the rivers rise, the floodplains absorb, and they also slow down that water, so they're reducing the speed and the quantity, which ultimately helps reduce the exposure of people and property to that flood damage. They also recharge groundwater supplies and filter pollutants because they act as riparian buffers. And they also provide critical habitat for a number of floodplain-dependent species. And NEDC is currently in litigation against the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, alongside other nonprofits, including the Center for Biological Diversity, Willamette River Keeper, and the Conservation Angler. And we are suing FEMA in hopes of bringing the National Flood Insurance Program into compliance with the Endangered Species Act. I won't bore y'all with the details of it because we could go on for days. But basically, the National Marine Fisheries Services in 2016 found that the NFIP was essentially compelling floodplain development in a manner that they described as permanent and self-propagating, so and incentivizing that development. And when we add concrete to floodplains, we have permanently lost that floodplain function. And while mitigation has definitely come some amount of way. It is not sufficient, and especially in terms of flood hazard reduction, when you build in the floodplain, you permanently alter the floodplain in a way that not only reduces the riparian buffer elements, it reduces the flood storage capacity elements, but you're putting your neighbors at risk, because even though you have elevated yourself out of the floodplain, the water still has to go somewhere. So when we make these very substantial permanent hydrogeological changes to the floodplain, it really exacerbates the harm to communities that is further compounded by climate change. Flood events are getting more intense, they're becoming more frequent, and again, the water has to go somewhere. So protecting these floodplains in their natural state is so critical to permanently protect that floodplain function. And again, like, conserving floodplains bolsters our climate resiliency, it preserves biodiversity, and it protects water quality, and conserves, necessary ecosystems that so many communities depend on. And this suit against FEMA has been really, really interesting, because it's kind of like the environmental messaging slam dunk, because not only do you have the ESA angle of restoring salmonid species and protecting the southern resident orca, you also have the element of climate resiliency. And I'd be remiss to not acknowledge that, yes, in Oregon we have a housing crisis, but is the solution to that putting people in harm's way? Absolutely not. Especially when the NFIP functionally has become kind of a federally subsidized payday for developers, putting people in places that we know are going to flood. So hopefully we can get some new maps and some new mitigation measures, and kind of discourage floodplain development, because once we lose those floodplain functions, they're gone forever. And in the Portland context, many industrial facilities, as we've been discussing, are located along the waterways and consequently in the floodplain. We are in the floodplain right now, and that means that these industrial activities that are very pollution intensive during the wet season are much closer to the waterways, and are also in areas that are heavily like we're all sitting on concrete right now, and that's all getting right into the Willamette. So, historically, this might have made sense. Proximity to water was facilitating trade and shipping and all those things, but we are paying the price now, and we have so drastically reshaped the hydrology and the floodplain function of this area. And so, put simply, this overlap of economic development and floodplain exposure, puts us all at risk. And in the context of industrial activities, they just generate such high levels of pollution in already, compromised areas, and then that risk is further compounded. And again, in light of climate change, we're aware of this dynamic and kind of further allowing for what I would consider to be short-sighted development in the name of bolstering our economy. Like, who is benefiting from this and who is losing from this? And as we, sit in the north reach of the Willamette, a place that's really heavily eyed by industrial folks, and has been, obviously borne the brunt of our previous economic endeavors. Like, we have the opportunity to protect what can still be protected, and make really concerted efforts to make sure that we are engaging in proper climate adaptation, and also holding the developers accountable. Like, okay, if you want to build here, then you need to make sure that you're achieving no net loss, so that your neighbors who also live here and also depend on clean water don't bear the brunt of that while you get a paycheck. Hopefully I've convinced y'all that there's a really, palpable connection between stormwater pollution control and protecting our floodplains. Once we lose those functions, they can't be lost. And it's, a great way to make sure we're protecting our communities and building that resiliency and supporting climate adaptation. while also making sure that any sort of economic development is not at the expense of the people who depend on these places. So thanks for your time, and thanks for being here, and thank you for having me.
Does this work? Okay. I have to follow all these brilliant people. Thanks everyone for coming out tonight. My name is Mitch Green. I'm a city councilor for District 4. I'm glad that Mike brought in Lewis Mumford to talk about the sort of silliness of having a river be an arbitrary political boundary, because I think that's my district over there. And I'm sitting in District 2, but that's the same watershed in some sense. And so I think when we talk about the North Reach, and we talk about the CEI hub, and we talk about the future of this city, I'm not thinking about just District 4. I'm thinking about this whole city, particularly this area. So I'm so excited to be here. Special thanks to Bonnie for reaching out to our office, inviting us here, and just the dedication for everyone. I know so many of you that I've seen doing advocacy in this city, and you've made a difference. So just real quick, because I always forget to do this, my chief made a list of the committees I sit on, because I think it's relevant from the policy perspective. So I co-chair the Arts and Economy Committee. I co-chair that with Councilor Dan Ryan. Note on that. So the Working Waterfront Coalition invited me to go on a boat tour. I couldn't go because I was holding a committee hearing so we could pass the Swimmable Cities resolution. So I just think there's that tension, and I think that kind of tension is always going to be at play when we talk about the future of this city. So I wanted to flag that. I'm also the vice chair of the Labor and Workforce Development Committee, because again, you're going to hear from folks over there that say, you can't do anything about that riparian zone, you can't do anything about the hub, you can't do anything, because those are jobs. Of course. But we have a just transition that we can do. And there were once jobs that are no longer viable because we've destroyed our watershed. So we can reimagine, right? So it's important to have that voice there. I'm also a member of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee and the Finance Committee. So, I'll just kind of get into this tonight, and then I'm sure you'll bring the hook out and pull me off stage when everyone's through with me. But we are in a very, very different political context in the city of Portland than we were a year ago, or the many decades that some of you guys have been fighting here. The post-charter reform world, I think, opened up a ton of possibilities, and some of you have been paying attention might have already noticed that we're testing that a little bit. And so the way that I think about it in my role is twofold. One, we've got to put forward a positive policy program that articulates a vision that's not just against something, but we're demanding something new. So we're demanding something that we've always been fighting for. And that's possible with this new council. But at the same time, we've got to be doing oversight and accountability and reacting to the status quo and reacting to people who are going to use this moment of change to drive a wedge in and say, oh, you can't do that. Yeah, don't do that because this is the way it's always been done. So there's a certain amount of that needs to happen with some urgency. And I raised that up early because right when I got sworn in, the first thing that we did is we had to take on Zenith Energy. It probably was not the first thing that I was going to do in that way, but when you find out that the administration is moving forward on a land use permit, you have to act fast, right? And I told you all I was going to act fast when we got in office. And we passed a resolution that is investigating their franchise agreement, and I've been updated that they've actually decided to hire outside counsel to do that investigation because conflicts of interest. So that is a good thing, and that's because some of us are continuing to apply pressure on that. But you can't get there alone. You've got to work collaboratively. And we've got, depending upon the issue, there's a progressive majority on city council, and we're not all in the same districts, but we all recognize that we were elected because we're not satisfied with the status quo, whether it's environmental issues, whether it's environmental justice issues, whether it's labor issues, the whole gamut. We're in it to kind of cooperate and fight, and so that also involves kind of pulling people over who are not necessarily expected values allies, right? There are some political differences that can be spanned based upon an issue, and one of those issues is the CEI hub, right? And so we passed that Zenith Energy Resolution 11-1, and that's, that speaks to that. But you have to use power. The whole point of getting elected and holding office is to use power. It's not to hold a seat warm and keep space for the people who've been very successful for a long time trashing our rivers, right? And so there are some risks. One of those risks is, if you've been watching I'm sorry? No. It's I've got the bum knee because whatever. Yeah, maybe I will need. I've been checking my brake lines. Let's just put it that way. One of the things that, if you've been paying attention to the budget stuff, you'll see that my office has taken some pretty big swings. We did a very controversial, I think rightfully and warranted budget amendment that tried to remove $13 million of general fund allocation from the city to prosper Portland. And it didn't pass, but it was worth trying. And it's worth calling the question on it, because we're at this moment where we're like, oh, we cannot afford one or two analysts so we can figure out what to do at the hub, because we're giving $13 million to the former Development Commission, which, by the way, is sitting on a $50 million strategic investment fund. That seemed wrong to me, right? So we tried it. We got real close. It didn't pass, but what we did is we heightened some tensions there. We brought it to the fore. We called the question on this idea that council never says no to that institution. They were a creature of this city. We can say no and we can do oversight. So I think we started that. And I've got a lot more to say about that as we go on. But I think one of the things that came out of that was a recognition that's like, Councilor Green and a couple allies are kind of ready to go hard on this. So let's give them some money. So we got about $3 million for some priorities. One of those for me was the James Beer Public Market in downtown. So we can have a place for farm-to-table produce, which I really support. We got some money for Portland Center Stage so it doesn't fold. I mean, that's a brilliant and important piece of the city. We also got some money for kind of low-key DIY space activation for artists, because the city, as I sit in a space like this, I see art as the center of the economy, as this vision. And that was what we were kind of, I saw from my other councilors as priorities. And so the way that I tried to approach all this was not so much, here's what I want, it's how do we collectively get the bag? How do we do this together? And so I was able to pass an omnibus that I brought over Councilor Clark. She had an amendment that got 2 positions for staffers to look at the CEI hub and come up with a plan. So we don't just put another plan on the shelf and say, we'll think about it someday. You have to hire someone to do some work or else it won't get done. So I didn't get both of those, but I got one of those positions in that omnibus. So I'm pretty proud of that. We got the other thing, public safety. We've talked about public safety a lot, and oftentimes it's thought about just as police. But, the Portland Bureau of Emergency Management is a skeleton crew. It's not even a skeleton crew. Like, what happens if we have the big one? We're in a mess, right? And so I amended a budget effort to restore police money by saying, let's not redirect it back to the police, which is where we found it under the spare change under the couch cushion. Let's move it into a set aside for all of public safety, right? And so now the service area level director can say, okay, based upon these bureaus, let's look at the need, right? And if you've got a credible hiring plan, here's a couple $1 million to make that happen. But that's the model going forward. We've got to get away from these bureaus kind of squirreling money and rolling it forward. As if they're not part of an integrated system. So I think that was a good thing, and that's gonna improve the safety of our city. It also provides resources for Portland Street Response to scale to 21st. We also got money for renters. Not much, but I mean, the first meeting I took at City Hall was a group of tenants from Old Town, Everett Station Lofts Tenants Association. They've never been successful talking to the city. And we brought them into City Hall and we had a little conference with them. And we asked them what's going on. And I'll spare you, I don't have time to go into long detail, but they were misled on what their rent should have been. And so we got some money to kind of make them whole for the next couple of years. So that's good too. I'm running out of time here, so I want to talk about the vision. Okay, so I co-chair that Arts and Economy Committee, and that's a really important thing because I am an economist, for better or worse, and we're in a moment right now where we need to re-envision what our economic system looks like, particularly with the center of this river. We've been talking tonight about how the river has always been at the center of the economy as long as this place has existed. The question of what does it produce and for whom does it produce goods for is the thing that changes. And whether or not it's sustainable is the thing that changes. So when we talk about reimagining urban development through Prosper Portland or something that comes after Prosper Portland, it needs to be envisioning models like this. Like I see here a completely different economic model than what I think the status quo kind of business community has envisioned of luring outside investors to then create, high value added industrial jobs or light industrial jobs. We don't need to do that. We just need to invest in our communities and we need to build community wealth. And part of that is lowering the cost of housing, getting very creative and expansive with how you finance and use land. It's pressing on our sort of the more boring but very important insurance pieces of the riparian zone, which I think council is going to take up an action on that soon. It's sort of taking a holistic, redefining approach to this. The economic opportunities analysis, for some of you guys are in the trenches on that. That term is a bit of a misnomer. I like to think of it as a non-opportunities analysis because it presupposes what we're trying to solve for. They're trying to solve for more industrial land. And I think what you have right now as a council, you at least have some of us on council who are locked in and know exactly what's going on in that analysis. And what you see in the administrative state is you can use very boring models as a way to shoehorn in politics. Okay, you can lean on the model. You say, well, the model says this. Well, what are your parameters of the model? Show them to me. Why are you exempting certain parcels of land below a certain acreages? Tell me why. And then you start to have the broader question. And that, I think, is going to be challenging and difficult, and it's going to be uncomfortable for a lot of people in this city who are not used to making waves. But that's why we were elected to do it. That's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to stop talking now because I want to hear, if I wanted to have their Q&A, I want someone to ask Mike so he can say the things he wanted to say to me. So thank you all for being here. I'll leave you with a call to action. Most of you guys are plugged into organizations, but for those of you who are new here tonight, and if you're not, talk to one of these folks tabling and sign up to their organizations. Thank you so much.
A lot to think about. Before we dive into question and answers, I'd like to introduce Andy Brown from PCHIRP, the Portland Committee for Human Rights in the Philippines, because what she has to talk about is very much connected to the issues we brought up today.
Thank you. Yes, hi everyone. My name is Andy. Like you said, I'm from the Portland Committee for Human Rights in the Philippines. We're a grassroots organization that stands in solidarity with the Filipino people as they fight for just peace and self-determination. And we are one of the founding members of the Pacific Coast Coalition for Seafarers, which is who I am here representing today. PCCS, the Pacific Coast Coalition for Seafarers, or PCCS, is a coalition of labor organizers, faith people, grassroots organizers, and nonprofits that are fighting for the rights, dignity, and welfare of seafarers. So the people who work on the ships that are docked right over here in these ports. We were established in 2020 when seafarers were under COVID experiencing really harsh conditions. In particular, we heard that a lot of Filipino seafarers were not being repatriated into their country. So that means that for most times, people's contracts are about 10 months, but for over a year, sometimes people were actually being stranded at sea, not being able to go back home. And you can imagine the kind of health issues, sanitation issues, nutritional issues that led, not to mention mental health issues that led for people. It's really great to be here with all these folks who have so much wisdom and knowledge about this river over here. Because I think that it's all very connected, and I think one theme that's similar to all of these is the invisibilization of these issues. And seafarers, the people who work in these ports over here, their issues are very invisibilized. The majority of the consumer goods that we use every day have actually been imported to us and carried to us by ship. So next time you use anything, think about not just who made it, but who brought it here for us. A lot of seafarers, 1 in 4 seafarers are Filipino, but a lot of seafarers come from heavily resource-rich nations, but nations that also are heavily exploited. So that means that they can't use resources and minerals, plants, fishes, and things in their own country for themselves, so they have to go find these really dangerous, difficult jobs like seafaring. Because of this, sorry, it's hard to talk over the train. Because of this, and like I said, the fact that it's very invisibilized, people are doing these jobs out at sea, there's a lot of exploitation and abuse. We've even heard stories about murder at the hands of captains. PCCS, we do advocacy, care packages, ship visits, and also campaigns, waging campaigns for the seafarers. Just 2 things really quick. One campaign that we've been waging has been the Justice for AJ campaign. So AJ Ketmarenia was a seafarer who sadly was found deceased in the Columbia River in September. One thing we hear over and over again when we're meeting with the seafarers is that people don't just fall off board. There was something here that happened, and there's been no thorough investigation yet into his death. Luckily, he has been compensated, or his family has been compensated by the J.J. Uglin Shipping Company, but the compensation was way overdue. And finally, just one more thing I want to say before I give our quick call to action is that, like I said, one of the things that we do is doing ship visits. So if any of you have, as individuals or as organizations, want to come visit the seafarers on their ships, please let me know, and I'd love to schedule something. But just want to leave us on a little note of hope that about a year ago, PCCS was able to meet with the crew of the MV Kojali ship. And we heard really horrible stories of what they were experiencing on this ship. They had no potable water on their ship. They had no pay. And the Filipino seafarers in particular are being charged exorbitant rates to use internet when they were docked, higher than their white counterparts. So it was a racist attack on them too. They were made to sign false documents about the time that they worked. And when they refused to sign those false documents, the captain retaliated against them. He hit one of them, and he made them work on the bottom of the ship, a job that would normally be done with 2 people alone at night, which was extremely dangerous. So we visited this crew and heard this really sad, horrible story. We came back to visit them a few days later, and they had confronted their captain and won back pay. And of course, I think that this first and foremostly was because they were willing to struggle, willing to stand up for their rights. But I'd also like to think the fact that there were people visiting them and making their job visible, making their job seen, that also helped influence the captain. So the work that we do is really important. So please join us in these efforts. Your organization can join the Pacific Coast Coalition for Seafarers. We can schedule a ship visit. And what I'm really here to say is that on June 25th, we're having a party for our 5th year anniversary. So please come join us June 25th, 6:30 to 8:30 at the Filipino Bayanihan Center. We'd love to see you there. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Okay, this is the time we have for question and answers. Does anybody have a card? Do we have some of the Rumble folks walking around and grabbing some of those cards? Looks like we've got a lot of questions. While we're collecting those, we could start with a question that is for Mitch that was handed to me earlier. Mitch, will you be the council member willing to bring Frog Ferry before a committee and council vote before July is out? Because if this doesn't happen, after 8 years and $40 million of work that's been done, including pro bono work, it's over.
That's a great way to start off the Q&A. Susan, I appreciate your tenacity.
I didn't get the question from Susan.
Oh, well, your leadership then. No, I'm not going to bring that before the council before July. There's not time in the agenda for it. Our last meeting is on June 20th, special meeting on June 25th, and it's a full up docket.
So, what do you see as the future then for the Frog Ferry?
We're going to have to continue to work it through committee, through the Transportation Infrastructure Committee. There's still some outstanding cost questions that the bureaus have raised that I'd like to understand more about. But I understand the disappointment for the delay for sure.
You can always follow up with a question related to that if you'd like to. Okay, so a couple other questions I have. We're waiting for other ones to come through. What are your suggestions for member of this audience who do want to become active in protecting our rivers? So, anybody has specific?
Well, we've talked about Bob Salinger more than once. You need to show up. And one of the things that he was expert at was packing the Planning Commission, Planning Sustainability Commission, which I sat on for 11 years, so I saw Bob a lot, but I also saw 100, 200, 300 folks who showed up, and it has a big impact. So I think Woody Allen said something like 90% of it is showing up. Show up.
Another thing is just keep your eyes open. If you see something going on, report it to any of the organizations out here. It's kind of a weird plug for NEDC, but so many of the cases that we bring are reported by individuals saying, hey, I was walking down this trail, or I was walking along the Columbia Slough and the water looked really, really weird. And sure enough, the water was looking very weird, and it was because someone was violating some sort of permit, and then we bring an enforcement case in XYZ. But Portland is so rich with activists, and we're all working together. And if one organization can't handle it, they are very good about passing it on to somebody else. So use those resources and spread the word around. Keep your eyes open.
Yeah, I'd also say that you need an inside-out strategy to deal with some of these big issues. So the kind of insights, you got some city councilors who are receptive to policy activism. As Mike said, show up, you do testimony, you do all that. That's part of it. But there are people who are really good at direct action. There are people who are really good at organizing through less traditional forms, and you need both. And so I think that we're in a moment right now where even if it's not just about ecological issues, if it's about emerging fascism, if it's about questions of democracy, respected diversity of tactics is what I would say.
Okay, boy, there's a lot of questions. Caleb, you can imagine there's a lot of questions about how the EPA Superfund restoration might be impacted by federal cuts.
And your new administrator.
Yeah, I imagine that'd be this question. So with regards to the Portland Superfund site, we are implementing a cleanup plan that was essentially done quite a while ago, and that cleanup plan hasn't changed. So we are moving full steam ahead. There's a lot of stuff going on in the news, a lot of change occurring right now. I am not a representative of the political administration that can speak to that. I am a public servant, and we are charged with protecting human health and the environment. So I will stay away from those topics. But with regards to the Portland Harbor Superfund site, things haven't changed. We are moving forward at the same pace that we have moved forward, and continue to implement this cleanup.
Also to you, Caleb, can businesses like Zenith Energy or other industry declare bankruptcy to avoid their restoration responsibilities?
So restoration is a little different from remediation. Restoration is done through natural resource damages. and through trustees. Remediation, companies can declare bankruptcy if they're a responsible party. I don't know if it's the same for restoration and natural resource trustees. I imagine there's a parallel process, but that process is, yes, a company can, go bankrupt. However, they have to submit extensive financial documentation for review and demonstrate an inability to pay, and that's a very rigorous standard. It requires opening up a lot of books. EPA is very experienced. We have civil investigators. We are very experienced in kind of piercing the corporate veil and shell games that you see. So companies do go bankrupt, and there is a process for that, but it's a very rigorous process.
There's a lot that could be discussed. One major thing that I think that that's been in the media that just happened was the Trump's decision on the 6 sovereigns, on the 4 tribes: Yakima, Nez Perce, Warm Springs, Umatilla, ODFW, and WDFW. That was a really comprehensive plan for salmon restoration, but also river restoration. It addressed water quality, it addressed fish passage, it addressed hydro, it addressed the Columbia River Treaty. There's so much that agreement that was done during the Biden administration, and it took years for the tribes and ODFW, WDFW to work on this, this settlement. It was really it's a basin-wide comprehensive plan. It wasn't just, let's remove the Snake River dams. No, this was a comprehensive plan that addressed many issues in our basin that would not only benefit the tribes, but it would benefit, fish, wildlife, the rivers, water quality, water temperature, cold water refuge, predation issues. There is so much in that agreement that that would benefit the whole Northwest, 4 states, and just really disappointed about that, because we put so much effort into it. And also another thing right now that's kind of going underway is the Northwest Power Conservation Council. They are doing their Fish and Wildlife Amendment, and the 6 sovereigns that I just mentioned, but also other fisheries managers. We submitted, you could probably say, thousands of pages into to the Northwest Power Council, and the decisions that are made by the Power Council will affect Willamette River, will affect the entire basin from Montana all the way down to Astoria. So once again, the tribes, ODFW and WDFW, took the lead. And if you go to their website, you'll see how much work that the tribes have put into that. Because we're really concerned about the future. Right now, water temperature is one of the key impacts to salmon right now, to salmon migration. 2015, we had the biggest fish kill in the Columbia. Thousands of sockeye salmon died, as well as sturgeon. 2021, it wasn't as bad, but we're thinking about the future, and the fish are a part of our life. These rivers are a part of our life. It's not something that we can just go buy at the store. It's not like that for us. We actually have to take time out of our life to go fishing. It's part of our practice and culture, and so I'm just thinking about there's different things happening, like the Power Council process, and then thinking about calling for action. We have some really good allies, that are standing with us, like the Columbia River Keeper, and others, American Rivers, and that are really standing beside us and supporting us. And you can really track kind of what's going on, and how they're supporting, and also like one of the panelists said, be there, be present. Really, sometimes a lot of times, I could be the only Native American in some of these hearings, and to tell you the truth, I'm attacked. I can just get attacked like I'm the whole tribe. It's like, oh, there's one tribal member, sitting there, and I'll get attacked during the whole hearing process, and it's really not fair. And we're just there because the salmon can't speak for themselves. And really, it's up to us as caretakers. Without these natural resources on this land, in this area, the salmon, the wildlife, the roots and the berries, if it wasn't for those important cultural species to us, we wouldn't be in existence today. And so today, we're speaking on behalf of them, to honor them, but also to protect them into the future. But just some different issues that I think about on a daily, every day. There's all different kind of issues, concerns that go through my mind. And so, just thank you for your time again.
Thank you, Elaine. You touched upon this a little bit, but there are several questions again about how we could be better allies. Do you want to say anything more about that?
I just kind of mentioned earlier, we have existing allies like the Columbia River Keeper and others, but individually. Sometimes you'll read in media what's the tribes, what's their mission, what do they want to see, and then there's comment periods, I feel it's important to support what the tribes are making public statements about, usually official statements too, not secondhand, but the tribes usually have official statements as well as the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission. We have official statements that could be followed and support in the many different things that we're dealing with. It could be legislative, it could be policy. Just really pay attention and write those statements down really to support what our causes are.
That's helpful. Several people want Mike, you to make the points that you want to make and ask your questions of Mitch.
You'll be hearing from me later too. Well, one thing is we have a significant amount of funding through the Portland Clean Energy Fund. I believe that money should be available to parks, to Bureau of Environmental Services to acquire and manage natural resources. King County, Washington has a natural resources department. I think, we've got folks, fabulous ecologists who know the landscape, know how to do restoration in different bureaus. A Bureau of Natural Resources is something we should be thinking about to consolidate that work. Finally, the Blue-Green Deal, which is very controversial, was actually put together by a number of folks from the various bureaus working together to try to figure out how to address climate change. The whole purpose of the Blue-Green Deal was to manage vegetation to reduce wildfire risk, restore natural areas impacted by climate change, construct floodplain and climate resilience projects, acquire and protect natural areas, and advance watershed resilience. And I think there's a lot in that plan that I would hope Council would consider seriously adopting.
I'll just respond quickly. I think those are all great ideas. We're going to have a conversation soon about the Portland Clean Energy Fund. I think there's going to be an update on the climate investment plan. I think we need to be looking, in particular, I'm worried that we're not really optimizing our spending there, and we're kind of spreading it in some areas that don't have a very clear climate nexus. But I respect the committee, I respect the process, and I want to fight to protect that. But I think those comments are worthwhile. While I have the mic, I just want to say the bureaus have not done a very good job with tribal consultation. They have done tribal notification, but that is not the same as tribal consultation. That's unconscionable. And so Councilor Elaine is taking the lead on an ordinance, a code change that will make that much more explicit. That you can't just notify for comments, that you actually have to do real consultation, which means you're at the table, which is going to have a huge effect on the North Reach. It's going to have a huge effect on all these other stuff. So I'll be working with her on that as a co-sponsor.
One thing I forgot is we need a climate adaptation policy. Again, I sat on the Planning and Sustainability Commission for 11 years. It took years to go from we have a good climate action plan, but there's the climate preparation strategies that we finally got. I cannot even find it on the city website. So we really need to formalize climate adaptation as part of the strategy to address climate change.
Yeah.
So once the 17 areas are cleaned up, how do we keep the river from being recontaminated when we continue to zone for heavy industry, especially on liquefiable soil in the face of climate and natural disasters?
That's a great question, and it's not an easy answer, and it comes down to probably a multi-pronged approach. Land use planning is a big part of it. Decisions have been made. It's difficult to reverse decisions. Land use planning is the responsibility of local governments. The federal government doesn't want to get involved in land use planning. That's one prong. There are other prongs, things like the 1200Z permit. How can you put controls in place to eliminate pollution going back into the river? And we've come a long way through things like the Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, and implementing those programs, making those programs stronger, working with local jurisdictions, strong enforcement programs, strong permits. All of these different approaches, I think, is what it takes. So it's no one silver bullet, but this multi-pronged approach, and it's a very difficult problem. I mean, you look at the CEI hub, and it's 100% of the fuel going to PDX and all the planes that we fly on. You can't just move that overnight. It's a very complex problem, and so it's really going to take that multi-pronged approach. It's going to take a lot of various interested parties at the stakeholders and diverse interested parties at the stakeholders to make sure the best outcome is realized.
Yeah, the city is in charge of zoning and land use, and that's really important. And so, yes, it's hard to unwind previous vested choices that we've made, but we don't have to continue to go down that road. So, continue to do the advocacy. We'll pay attention, for sure.
I think maybe this last question to Mitch. Do you know about the well-being economy? If you want to talk about that a little bit. Do you see opportunities to build that vision, analysis, strategy into city policy?
I don't know that specific moniker, but what I can tell you is every economic system is a social provisioning process. It's a way that human beings get together, interact with the ecological systems that they reside in, and they're embedded in social systems, and they all have the same problems, like how do you get your daily bread and then how do you share it? How do you produce and how do you distribute them? So we can envision anything that's viable. We just have to change our institutions. And so what we have, what we have is capitalism, right? Capitalism is an extractive system. The point of production is to produce, to extract value, and whether or not it's good for the environment it's a coincidence. It's probably bad for the environment. It's also bad for people. And so, it's not easy, but you have to change your institutions. You have to re-articulate and make an expressed a desire for that change. And when I came in here today, this is my first time at this space. This feels a lot closer to what you're describing. This kind of like intentional. We don't want to develop this land. We want to kind of create space for people to express themselves, live here for low cost, and engage in social intercourse. I think we can do more of that around this city and around this region. You have to take a regional approach. It's not just a city. It's a whole set of watersheds. So I don't really know what the wellness economy is, but I haven't been a have been reading economics papers for some time now, but it sounds like something I like.
Let's give our incredible panelists a big round of